right, this is the second episode of my new podcast, Teach the World, Feed the World. I have my mother, Dr. Martha Warfield, on, our first guest, of course. And we've already done this once, but I don't use Zoom and forgot to hit record. So here we go, Mom, for a second time. But, we just have to make it better than the first time.
Teaching learning experience, right?
Jeez. Yes, and they're always quite painful in my mind. That said, thank you for being on the show for a second time.
You get better every time.
At least we got the record button on, Lord Jesus. Okay, Ma, thanks for being on the show for a second time, for real, because we've been here before. So we definitely got to get something to eat after this, which of course leads me to the second part of my podcast that'll be coming, where we talk to teachers and we talk to educators and we also talk to people that create good food, because that's kind of what my life has been for the past 15 years as a culinary arts teacher. But my joy is in this moment to have my mother on here and talk about her educational experiences and just a little bit of background. It was extremely vital to my ability to believe in myself that I could be a teacher and potentially be a good teacher. Well, it has everything to do with that, as you and Dad were both educators. So we don't go back again for a second time to your youth and talk a little bit about your education and what that meant to you and growing up and so forth. So yeah, let's hear about going back to Dwajak and what was that like as little Martha and how you started your journey in education.
Well, I was the last of four in my family, and the oldest was 13 years older than me. So my first recollection, regard about education was when she graduated from high school. And so she went to college the same year I went to kindergarten. And in my mind, there wasn't a whole lot of difference between kindergarten and college. Where you go to school is different, and then between her and me, I had a brother and a sister, and they also went to Western when they graduated from high school. So it's always been a subject of interest in my household. When we sat down to eat at night and we did family ate together, the conversation was always around, how was school today? What did you do in school today? They actually had real stories to talk about. I made mine up because I wasn't in school, but I've been told it was very entertaining what I had to speak about. But that was kind of the way that we were nurtured to believe that we were going to do that from the time we were my age all the way through. And probably for me, even for the other two older than me, we all learned from my older sister, because everything that she experienced as a student at a university, well, at that time it was a college, we heard about it and we knew about it. And those were stories that, even today, I think about the fact that in that period of time, Black students couldn't live on campus. As a matter of fact, lots of places downtown they couldn't eat, couldn't go to, and the Black community in Kalamazoo opened up their homes and made room for students to live so that they could go on campus. Now I'm telling you that wasn't but a handful of students at the time, but it was an important period of time. A lot of them were athletes, some of them were, pretty significant on the campus, but to live on the campus. Here's a story that I always think about. When my oldest sister Phyllis was graduating in her senior year, there was a requirement for those students to live in what they called a management house, because she was in the program where they had, it was like a home ec kind of program. And students had to live and manage the house, from everything from the budget to the house to everything that goes on. And so she was called in by whoever, the deans or whoever they were, and told that they would give her credit, but she would not have that privilege. They would just give her credit for the class. And one of the classmates that she had for the 4 years she was in the program spoke up and said, she can be my roommate. I would like her to be my roommate in this house that we have to live in. And that was the only way that she was able to have that experience as part of her college degree. So shortly after she graduated, then she applied for a teaching position in Kalamazoo. She was hired as a teacher only if there was a supervising teacher that would come in and check out her teaching and how she was doing it. So that was not that was not imposed, let me put it that way, on anybody else. But the understanding of that was that she was a recent graduate, and they just wanted her to be successful. But the real deal was that she was an African-American teacher. And by the way, she was the first African-American post-secondary teacher in Kalamazoo. So they had their eyes on her.
I thought she said that, and I seem to want to recall, Mom, I'm sorry to interrupt. I seem to recall Aunt Flea saying that if one parent complained,
Oh, yes, she was out.
yeah,
Could have been teachers, could have been students, could have been parent, anybody who made a complaint.
anybody,
Okay, bottom line is she advanced quite well in the school system and ultimately was requested to Western to teach in the department that she graduated from. The amazing cycle, isn't it? That she's a teacher in that same department. There's lots of stories like that. She's not the only one who experienced that. But that was in my head as I was growing up and getting ready to go to Western. And my brother comes along 5 years after her, and he, of course, had a different experience. Students could live in the residence halls at that time, but there were other things that they couldn't do. And I remember one time there was an event on campus. The African American students had a ball of some kind, and he had a young lady as a date for that program. And the next day school started, he was called into the president's office because he was told that young black men cannot date white women. And he said, well, who did? Because I don't know what you're talking about. Bottom line was they had a fair-skinned black woman that they thought somebody reported she was white. And so that kind of stuff went on even during the time he was there. And it was like that. Then, my next oldest sister was 3 years ahead of me. And at that time, going to school was $107.50 a semester tuition, which is, kind of apples and carrots right now. But it was a lot of money back then. And so there was this network of families in the community that wanted to have support for younger children or a live-in maid or whatever you call it. And so she lived with the same family that my oldest sister lived with when she was going to Western because she couldn't live on campus. She lived with a family that was, the man was a physician and his wife, and they had a son. And Carolyn moved into that same house. And so when I came along, I also took a position with a family that was well established in Kalamazoo, a business person who had a young daughter, and they needed somebody to babysit and be there for her when she got out of school. And that was my job for the first year I lived in their house. Then Carolyn and I moved together in the home that was open to us, that was owned by a black family, and she graduated and I continued until I graduated. So everybody in those, I'm talking about a span of, 13 to 20 years, we all learned how to accommodate ourselves and get what we needed because our real objective was to go to school and finish and get a degree. And we were in any position where we could, the social differences that were going on in this community keep us from doing that. I went all the way through Western 4 years, and I very seldom saw a black student in the same class as I was. You were out there by yourself and you had to deal with it. But I can say that students, we came together and we were supportive of each other in ways that I think, it would be nice if that was the case now. And I'm not sure that it isn't, but I can tell you that it was extremely important for us to be able to do that with each other.
So when you were in school though, Mom, tell me a little bit, just a quick step backwards. You went to Dowagiac High School. How was that experience?
Well, the Wajak High School was not a whole lot different than any other school, and even in the state of Michigan, our numbers of students that looked like me was really small. Most of us came out of families that didn't have education background. Most of them didn't have family who had gone on post-secondary. So anybody who did was really kind of making paths for the first time in their family. I was fortunate because I had, the track ahead, like I told you, with a sister and brother, two sisters and a brother that had gone on to college. And so I was pretty well prepared by the time I got to college to know that. But in the city itself, I call it a city, the Wajak, the community, we had to make ways for ourselves. I had a number of experiences. I was in high school band when I was in high school. We were good enough to get invited to the Rose Bowl. The Orange Bowl in Miami, Florida, little town from Michigan. And it was wonderful. Everybody was excited. We worked all summer doing everything. Every band member had a job, and we were putting into what it cost for us to get down there. And when we got to Florida, the reservation for the band was in a hotel that was in the travel industry, which was part of the Dade County School District. And guess what? Yes, Dade County schools were segregated. So we landed and we lived a couple of places until they finally found room for us in one of the largest Black hotels on Miami Beach. And, you know, when I look back about it now, I have to laugh because we ended up in a hotel with the Count Basie band and a bunch of entertainers that were on Miami Beach. And we were hubbing around with them, eating off of a menu, anything we wanted. And the rest of them were learning to eat grits. They didn't know what that was. It was an amazing time. Okay, so we came back to our district, essentially not supposed to talk about that experience. But my father listened to that very well, and he didn't share that with the school board at the next meeting.
Good for him.
Yeah, and I'm sure that if he had not done that, they probably wouldn't have known about it.
And
But
your dad, what was your dad, or was it great grandpa who was?
superintendent, I guess, the board member. I can say that because I don't know how far in school he went, but I can tell you he didn't go very far.
So this was Littleberry, and so any Black teacher that was teaching Black children down there stayed
Lived in their house.
with you, with him and his wife,
Right. My grandmother.
your grandparents. Okay, cool. So that was Cassopolis.
Calvin Center is outside of Cassopolis. You know, interestingly enough, they were given the citation of having the oldest centennial farm in the family. So that means that they were down there. They were there before the Civil War. My great grandfather fought in the Civil War.
That's right. Okay, I do recall that. Okay, so they were here before the Civil War, and because they had walked up from South Carolina, right,
That's correct.
with Frozen, Ohio, and all of that. Okay.
Wagon train came up. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Back to your journey. When you got done with high school, Mom, tell me, so you ended up at Western, and tell me about your major and what you were going to do after that.
Well, I was definitely going to be a world-class journalist. That's what I told myself because I was really excited about it. I wrote for the high school newspaper and I wrote for
Good writer, though, Mom. You're a good writer. You helped me with every paper I ever had to write. Thank God.
yeah, I was excited about writing and internationally. I had enough information about the world to know that I could go other places besides just in this country. So that was kind of interesting because I actually took a French class, 2 years of French in high school because I was going to be in some kind of language besides English. I just knew I was going to go there. And so when I went to Western as a journalism student, and as I got to the end of my second year for students, that was a supervisor of summer park. And so I went in and I told them I was interested in that position. And she said, well, are you in any of these programs? And it had to be a social work, sociology, or in that area. And I said, no, but I am now. So I became a social work major. That's how you get where you get sometimes.
Hey.
Do what you got to do. And I worked the summer part while I finished up my undergrad program because I finished in the summer. And then I went to work as a social worker for the county for a while. And then I did an internship with the juvenile court. I was a juvenile probation officer.
And then when
That,
you,
by the way, that was an experience as well too, because I was in the Kalamazoo County building, which is downtown, not the new one, but the older one. And I was the only person of color in the building. There was one other man who was on the sheriff's department. The two of us held down the Black community working for the county.
who was the other person? Do you know?
Yeah, I don't remember his name right now. I just remember he was an officer.
What about, so when you were still in that position when Dad decided to go to school in Oregon?
Yes, I was in that position when he decided to go to Oregon. And fortunately for me, I took the state test for the same position I had here in Kalamazoo out there. And so I became a child welfare worker in Eugene, Oregon.
Talk a little bit about that transition and then eventually going to school out there, Mom.
Well, the transition to Oregon was really kind of an interesting one. We were out there. Actually, Chuck's brother John was a couple of years older than he had made the decision to go, and then he encouraged Chuck to apply and come, and that's how we initially got invited to go out there. But what was going on at U of O at the time was that they were looking to expand their diversity in their student population because it was pretty much not there at all. And they hired a professor who came from Washington, D.C., Arthur Pearl, to put an urban education program together on that campus. I'm talking about 100 years ago. I mean, not really, but you know. Okay, so Chuck was in that program as other doc students were, and their responsibility was to recruit some students from groups that had never been on campus before, which included students out of Watts, which was California, and at that time Watts was going through some real lots of discourse going on there. Then they recruited out of the fields, the students who were there, who were mostly Hispanic students who were working the agriculture line, and they were either picking crops, most of them right out of the field.
Yeah,
And
migrant stream, right?
yeah, it was a migrant stream, very much like the one that came through Michigan.
Yeah.
And the other group were students who came out of the Indian reservation, Tanita, which was the state of Oregon. So they had Native American, indigenous, they had the students out of, they used to call them the students who were the crop pickers, but they were really mostly Hispanic students and Watts. If you can imagine putting three groups like that together and then try to offer them this opportunity, not only to go to school, but to get them through the GED in the summer so they could actually be at the university as freshmen in the fall. I can't tell you that.
I remember we didn't eat grapes and there were other foods. I remember going to the store and like, we're not buying that. I remember that so vividly. And I remember Dad would be gone. Didn't he have a job where he would be in California in Watts?
Well, yeah, he was out recruiting a lot, and then they were also teaching classes in.
It was kind of a lot. And I remember that. And I also remember that they would be talking about them kids riding because I think Kennedy got shot, Robert got shot during that time. And I just remember talking about riots and trying to bring those kids back to center. I mean, of course, I was too young to really know what they were talking about, but I remember those events being a part of the backdrop of conversations that I kind of sort of didn't know what was happening, but I
Well,
knew
that
those
all,
words.
all of that happened while we were out there. Kennedy had just on a train from Seattle down to Oregon and down to California. He'd been in,
He had just left Eugene, right?
yeah, the day or two before he was assassinated. Yeah,
We went to see him. You took us to the train to see him,
that's right.
train depot.
And then we were out there, of course, when King was assassinated, and that was a real threat. We huddled together. The community was really shaken, and we didn't know where that was going to go. So that was a pretty difficult time for us. University was good about it, and very supportive. We never had a problem in that respect, but it was just the shock of it and being in the community that we were in. Rough.
Yeah. And yesterday being April 4th, the anniversary of his passing, these many years later, I remember Jack Dirksen
Yeah.
busting through the door, or that might have been Kennedy. He was like, Kennedy's been shot, Kennedy's been shot. And I woke up and talked about that. I don't remember King's assassination in that way, but
He actually did that when it was King's assassination, was our next door neighbor.
yeah, I just remember being woke up and they were talking about it on TV. That's crazy. Okay, well, back to the educational piece. I mean, that was an education to live through the 60s.
It was an education.
Yes, it
Year,
was.
every single day. And a lot of it was associated with survival more so than it was an academic kind of process. But in the process of surviving, you learned a lot of things that you otherwise would not know. And one of those, I think, was a lot of collaboration amongst people who cared about each other and reached out and did some things that sometimes I think people forget.
I absolutely think people forget because that was an interesting time to be, the only Black kids. So there was three of us, me, Carl, and some other little boy who I don't remember in this entire school starting first grade. We were the only Black kids there. And I remember there was a motorcycle group. Can't remember. They all were Hell's Angels or somebody. And knowing that that was not a good space to be in if you ever saw them. And just, being conscious of that at a very young age. Tell me a little bit about, Mom, though, University of Oregon for you. So you got your master's there. Talk a little bit about that for us.
Well, I started the master's before we moved out there. And then I put that on hold while I went to work as a child welfare worker because while Chuck was in school, to pretty much help support us while we were there. And then shortly before he graduated, I thought, well, Art Pearl's out here. He's got this great program. I might as well take advantage of being here while I can. And so Chuck came back to Michigan because he made a decision when we left Kalamazoo, he made a decision to come back to Kalamazoo because he knew that this was where he wanted to put. His brother went on, took another path and went to Minnesota and then on down to the University of Texas. So I said, well, I'm not that far from being through with the master's program, so I'm going to stay in Eugene, and that's what I did. You and Carl stayed out there with me, and I finished in a semester and came back to Michigan.
I remember. Yep. So, because I started first grade out there, that
That's,
year, and then came back to Woodward, second grade.
that's correct.
So you got your master's out there, and then you came back. What did you do? And then you ended up getting your doctorate. Can you talk about how you made that decision?
Well, I did a few things in between those two. I actually came back to Kalamazoo and I worked as a consultant for a community base for a while. And then I went to KVCC and I taught, which was my only actual teaching experience was at the Valley. And it was a program called Community Service Assistant, which is a 2-year social work program. And the program was made up of students mostly already residents of Kalamazoo and the Kalamazoo area. And interestingly enough, probably in their 2024, they were mostly adults. They weren't high school graduates turned 18 going to community college. These were mostly mature older people. And they loved the program and they did really well. And there were a lot of jobs in the community that were written for 2-year social work person. So they filled positions that were really necessary in the community for that period of time. But KVCC then changed their emphasis more towards the business management and business classes, and they cut out the social work, and the social work class went away. And it was not not many people were happy about that, especially the people in that program. But like I recall, a lot of them are still in Kalamazoo and have done extremely well. A lot of them actually did go on to Western and got a master's in social work. So that was another story. But at that point, and I was working at child guidance as a psychologist at the same time. And it was kind of interesting, Karen, because one job leads to another, and sometimes you're doing two of them at the same time. And so I ended up doing a lot of that kind of thing. And then what happened was the Michigan State's education department opened up what they call an urban education. It was a higher education program, but with an urban emphasis. And everything I had done up to that time led me straight into that door because it was really about things that I was already doing, had experience in. So the doctorate was obviously the next best choice for me. And so I drove back and forth from Kalamazoo. I was in that program while I was still teaching at the Valley, even while I had my own office, because I had an office, about 9 or 10 people who we contracted a lot of work. I actually had a contract with the federal government for veterans who were going through medic stress and community programs for students with KPS, which was during that period of time. Lots of good things happened during that period. So the program at Michigan State just helped make all those things come together for me.
State was, and you commuted like, did you commute daily, weekly? I can't remember, Mom. I think I was in junior high or high school. When did and I remember you staying a couple weekends when you were doing midterms and stuff, you would stay up there, a bunch of food, and then you would be gone because, Lord, living with all those boys when you were not here.
Well, you just told 3 stories in one because
My bad.
we had a house full of people at that point in time. Well, in the interim and all of that, you will remember that we got invited to go to Ghana. While we were there, we met the couple of families that had young men who wanted to come to the States and go to school. And so as a consequence, Koku became a member of our household and came back and went to Western. He was at Western with us for 5 or 6 years. Something like that.
Yeah. Didn't he get his master's here too?
Yes, and a friend of his came in the last 2 years, so we
And
had
yeah, okay.
2
Because my brothers. Well, and two, Mom, I mean, they just weren't any African students. I mean, cousin was Kofi
Right.
Annan, UN Secretary of the United Nations, and was a well-established banker, businessman when he went back. And his
Yeah.
family was significant in that community, I think. They were business owners and
Well,
educators too.
yeah, those were the people who invited the group that we went with to Ghana in the first place. So that was really good. Yeah.
Was that through McAllister College with Uncle John, though?
Well, John was the first one who made the connection, and he went the summer before we did. But then after that, when we went out there, then that's when we made the connection with
Okay.
came back as a result.
He was the secretary of UN at that time, but that's who Kojo's family came from. And I remember, I just got to throw this in there because it was pretty mind blowing when I looked back and did my research and understand who we had met. But we did meet the mother of Kwame Nkrumah,
That's true.
so first president of Ghana. So that was amazing. I remember when I actually was able to really understand because I think we were like 12. I was 12, Carl was like 13 or so when we went. Okay, so then that legacy, and my time is getting short because we got the free version. So, Mom, PhD. So you got your PhD. What's your thesis?
It was in counseling psychology and with an emphasis on urban education. Yeah.
Okay. And so you say that was your real teaching job was at KBCC. And I just have to say this because now being a teacher, I understand the subtle ways in which students express their gratitude. And you don't realize it in that moment how significant it is, but the little gifts that they give you and the little things that they do. And I remember you always used to have those because I used to eat them all. Those M&Ms with peanuts, that was your thing. And I remember I thought it was a gift to me because when it was your last year, I remember you getting a whole box of those from your students at that time. And I was like, they must really love you, Mom. But in hindsight, from where I sit now, that was significant that your students, honored you. They knew you in that way. They saw your little things that were personal to you and they honored those in you. And that was just really cool.
I forgot about the M&Ms, but yeah, you're right about that. I think
That's
that's
exactly
it's it was a community then, and the kind of things that we were doing were in the community, and the people were dedicated to what they were doing. And so it wasn't only classes that they were taking, but it was a relationship they were building. That's
significant. And we'll have to talk about community based and some of the really amazing groundbreaking work that you did with teachers when you weren't teaching.
absolutely, because a lot of the things that I was able to accomplish with the Kalamazoo schools and with the community came out of those programs. So yes, that would be.
We're going to do that, especially since you upstairs, not downstairs. We're going to talk about it.
Be sure to hit the record button.
I'll make sure I hit the record button, Lord Jesus. So thank you again, Mom. And speaking of that, the other half of my podcast is going to be about eating, and I'm hungry. So I hope this worked because I am ready to get me a sandwich or something. Love you, Mom. I'm going to run upstairs and holler at you in a minute. Thank you for everything.
You got it.
All right. Bye-bye.